morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the High Bar Research Alliance, also known as the HRA. I'll be the moderator of today's one-hour event, and I'm joining you today from the University of British Columbia, where I support the development of research partnerships with industry and with government. And I've been able to, directly apply some of the learnings I've taken from these High Bar webinars in the past. So I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that the land on which UBC is situated is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We're very grateful to live and work together in this beautiful place. So this is the 23rd webinar in our series for researchers, administrators, and others who are interested in what we call highly integrative, basic, and responsive research. Our previous webinars are available for reviewing on the HRA website, which can be found at highbar-research.org. And before our featured presentation today, I'll just take a brief minute to explain the structure of today's event. So we're going to begin with an overview of the High Bar research concept from Dr. Lauren Whitehead, Director of the HRA. And next, Dr. Auerbach will spend about 20 minutes sharing the key outcomes of an initiative that she's co-led called Modernizing Scholarship for the Public Good, which really challenges universities to rethink how they deliver on their missions, and also has a goal of spurring more publicly engaged and impactful research. Then we'll have another 25 minutes or so for Q&A, followed by an opportunity for Elise to finish up and wrap up with some final takeaways. And I think we're ready to get started. So to kick us off with an overview of the High Bar research concept, please welcome Dr. Lauren Whitehead. Lauren is the director of the HRA, as well as UBC's special advisor on entrepreneurship, innovation, and research, and a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy.
The first of all is this is about High Bar Research and also the High Bar Research Alliance. I'd like to describe a few things about those words, really. So High Bar Research projects embrace two key dualities. The first is that they integrate academic leadership with societal leadership. And the reason that's good is it creates cognitive diversity that fuels successful innovation. So it's a powerful way to innovate. The second is that we integrate, or these projects integrate, academic purpose with societal purpose. And that creates new knowledge, which is valuable, of course, but it also applies it to practical challenges. And the net result is a lot of good things happen from these ideas. And we particularly emphasize the synergy of these ideas. So that's why we use the words highly integrative to describe this kind of research. And then secondly, noticing on the left, we've got academic use, and on the right, societal benefit. We describe that as being basic and responsive, and hence overall highly integrative, basic and responsive. It leads to the acronym High Bar. Just a label, but it's a label for a very important place. And that place is the intersection of all four of these ideas. They're hard to get together in one project. And when you do, amazing things happen. So that's what we're trying to encourage with the High Bar Research Alliance. That impact is what we're after. So what about the HRA? What is it? Well, it's a distributed, organized network of experienced volunteers who are united in their support of High Bar research projects. So together, we aim to increase the rate of High Bar research projects, the number that are happening, the fraction that are happening, from about 1 in 20 at universities when we began in 2020 to about 1 in 5 by 2030, while improving all kinds of research. So that's the goal. And this, in turn, will help universities respond more effectively to societal needs while increasing the overall excellence of their diverse research portfolios. Now, achieving that goal requires some adjustments in academic culture, and that relates to today's webinar. We'll be learning about an action framework for achieving positive culture change. Our speaker, Elise Auerbach at the University of Michigan, will be discussing a recent multi-institutional project which she led with support from the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, culminating in an extensive action framework for encouraging publicly engaged, impactful research, including High Bar research projects. Well, I'm very excited to hear from Elise on this. I know it'll be very interesting. And at that point, it's a pleasure, Kira, to hand back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. So now I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter. So please welcome Dr. Lise Auerbach, who is currently the Director for Public Engagement and Research Impacts at the University of Michigan's Office of Research, where her team looks at developing and deploying strategies that support university faculty in their public engagement efforts. So over to you, Lise. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much, Kira. So I, like them, are going to briefly share my screen. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. I've actually followed the HRA for quite a while, since I was a graduate student. And so it feels like it's a little bit of a full circle moment, which is just a real pleasure. So again, thank you for having me. I have a couple of things to say today, but the first thing that I want to say is thank you. Thank you to the organizations and groups that supported the effort that I'm going to speak to you about today. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities and my home institution, the University of Michigan, which acted as hosts for me over the 2 years that I worked on this project, as well as the phenomenal funders, the Cobley Foundation, the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, the Rita Allen Foundation, and also the National Science Foundation, which is supporting the tail of the work that is continuing with APLU now that I've left the project. So to contextualize, since I know that the HIBAR Research Alliance constitutes members outside of the US system, I want to contextualize the system, contextualize the report in the US system, and talk just a little bit about the US system, because that's the grist of the report, but also can provide a little bit of context about how the report applies and where you might need to do a little bit of creative dot connecting for those of you who are working in international contexts. So in the US, as of about 2022, there were nearly 4,000 degree granting post-secondary institutions in the United States, according to the National Center of Education. Nearly 4,000 institutions, right? And these are institutions of all shapes and sizes. They've got vastly differing characteristics. You can think about the institutions based on the type, i.e., where they get their funding sources. They might be public, they might be private, they might have a land grant mission, which has to do with a legislative charge associated with legislative actions like the Morrill Act. They might have private or for-profit charges. You can also think about them in terms of research capacity. In the United States, the Carnegie Foundation uses a classification system to examine research expenditures and to classify institutions based on how high research outputs they have, and uses an informal system known as R1, R2, R3 to designate very high, and less high research productivity. You can think about the educational focus of the different types of institutions, from liberal arts or 2-year or 4-year types of degrees. If they're associates granting institutions, if they're bachelor's granting institutions. You can describe the types of student populations they serve. Many institutions with the sort of big splashy names tend to be predominantly white serving institutions, but there are lots of really phenomenal institutions that are minority serving institutions or serve populations of students that are based in rural or urban serving environments. Historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities are really inspiring, phenomenal types of institutions that are really have anchored a lot of fantastic work in this space for quite a long time. And in this space, I'm talking about engagement in particular. We'll come back to that. And I think this is a moment where we can really look to their excellence and recognize and acknowledge that work. And also recognizing that the US is a great big place. We've got 50 states and all of those 50 states have different cultures and different positionalities, that the location that these institutions are positioned in also makes a really big difference in terms of thinking about how an institution situates itself. So the thing that I want you to take away is, with just 4,000 different types of institutions, there is not a single strategy that you could outline that is going to fit every single institution. There is no one size fits all. And I want to underline that there is no one size fits all. And I think that that's true not just of the United States higher education system, but also of the global higher education system. Everything that I'm about to say is going to need to be taken in context and need to be shaped to be appropriate and interpreted in a local context in order to be actionable. And so that is both the challenge of trying to produce a report that is intended to be used widely, and also hopefully the inspiration for those of us who are working to make change on the ground. I also want to start with an acknowledgement that there are lots of professionals and communities that touch this work, from cooperative extension, especially here in the US, to public engagement and boundary spanning professionals, to knowledge mobilization professionals, to librarians and educational outreach professionals, and that there are lots and lots and lots and lots of words that refer to this type of work, right? And so even the words HIBAR, highly integrative basic and applied research, connect to all of these different types of terms. And so when I'm talking about this work, please know that when you hear me describe engaged or societally impactful or equitable or like knowledge mobilization or research impact, this is the sort of broad umbrella that I'm speaking with today. And so my hope is that collectively what we can do is orient around this umbrella and acknowledge that while these different terms have their own history, their own nuances, their own specific communities that orient and use them, that there are hearts to these words that are shared across our communities. And I'm hoping that you can hold those hearts in mind and go with me with this language, at least for the time being, as we talk about this report. Okay, so with enough ado about language, let me actually talk about the report. So as Kira and Lorna mentioned, I had the great pleasure of serving with the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities as a Civic Science Fellow for 2 years working on this initiative. And this initiative was born out of the motivation with APLU, which is an association that supports over 300 institutions of higher education in the United States, to really help to catalyze and support the public mission of these institutions, to recognize that there are ways that our institutions must do a better job of supporting a subset of scholars who are really dedicated to supporting and serving public impact and supporting the public good. And so they, over the course of the entire history of APLU, have been working in various forms and capacities to serve this public good, and felt that the time was right to really support a series of efforts that crystallize guidance, especially for university leaders, to really think about what collective action and reform in this space might look like. And so to this end, the objectives of this effort were twofold. Number one, to recognize that institutional heterogeneity that I described before, to recognize that different institutions have different affordances and also different weaknesses, and that creates different opportunities to try and help support engaged and equity-oriented scholars. And number two, then by building on that collective understanding, provide scaffolding, guidance, and tools for these university leaders to use as they think about and create institutional change initiatives that might be able to help support them in driving forward support efforts to create permissive, supportive environments for these scholars. So please know, and these links will come up again and again, that all of the materials from today's presentation are available at aplu.org/modernizing-scholarship, and also at the public repository that's listed online, listed there at osf.io 42753. So the report itself has a few different chunks, and I'm going to provide just the very tippy tip of a large iceberg today, with the invitation that if this catches your interest, that you dive as deep down the rabbit hole as you're willing to go. The major elements of the report include the 8 areas of strategic action, which I'll introduce to you as part of today's discussion, a series of case studies, two types of case studies that illustrate the process of institutional change, and case studies that illustrate successful change initiatives at a variety of different types of institutions, a set of key learnings from the entire initiative, and then a database that comprises a series of actions and tactics that you, as an agent of change in your institutional context, might be able to use in trying to think about actions that you might take to help create a more permissive, supportive environment for engaged and equity-oriented scholars in your contexts. So without further ado, let's dive in, because we've provided more than enough header information for all of it. So the 8 areas of strategic action were derived from, I won't say comprehensive because I don't believe that there can be such a thing as a comprehensive literature review, but an extremely extensive literature review that myself and several students conducted over the course of several years. We surveyed many different literatures, including that associated with institutional change, that associated with the study of higher education, that associated with marketing, with cooperative extension, with with many different literatures. I'm just totally blanking now that I'm trying to list them off, which is always the hazard of trying to do that while you're talking out loud. And what we intended to do is, from this big literature review, to draw out and synthesize the types of interventions, the types of actions, the types of tactics that folks might be able to take in order to drive forward change. And what these 8 areas of strategic action represent are umbrellas of how these many, many different actions clustered together. These actions include developing and installing committed institutional leaders. In the US context, increasingly there are positions like chief engagement officers, chief diversity officers, who are dedicated, responsible individuals who are resourced and equipped to be able to drive institutional strategy to help support engagement work and equity work across the institution. There are also programs, importantly, that are committed to leadership development efforts to develop more of these leaders and to help support leaders who might be in other types of executive officer positions, like provosts or chancellors or president positions, to recognize, espouse, and support the value of this type of work. So really supporting leadership. It's really, really clear, both from the literature and from practice, that without supportive leadership, this type of work kind of dies on arrival. In the US, at least, I know that the recruitment and promotion and merit review systems are really complicated in different types of international contexts. But in the US, a colleague of mine likes to describe tenure and promotion as the trumpeting elephant in the room when it comes to barriers to progress, because much of the tenure and promotion practice associated with especially academic scholarship tends to be what connects to what's referred to, although I don't like this, as more traditional scholarship that's primarily intended for other academics, that isn't necessarily translated for societal benefit, that isn't undertaken using different types of methodologies, that's quote unquote more pure. Again, I don't like this, but this is the way that it is frequently characterized. And so a second major area of attention is overhauling, reforming, promotion, retention, promotion, and tenure practices. And again, this can be broken down into a lot of steps. I'll actually unpack this in just a moment as an example. The third major area is investing in institutional structures and networks. This might involve creating communities of practice such that folks who exist in different types of professional spaces in a large decentralized university can connect with one another and share information. It also might look like, in a university who can support it, creating a specific type of center or infrastructure to house professional staff or boundary spanners to serve specific type of engaged or integrative functions, right? It's really trying to think about what types of infrastructures are needed in order to be able to serve these missions. Number 4, to establish both the data structures and the reporting structures, the human structures to interact with that data to help support this work on an institutional level. So what might it look like, for example, if institutions actually had a clear example of all of the partnerships, all of the community engaged research partnerships that existed across the entire institution? How might we be able to better understand which community partners were consistent in terms of their partnerships with the university? Where might we be able to understand where there were areas for opportunity? How might we be able to think about opportunities for resource sharing in a different way? The next up are launching and maintaining catalytic funding programs. Many universities have the capacity to help invest in and start up different types of research projects that are deemed of strategic value. Many universities actually invest catalytic funds in projects that would be described as high bar. And so I think that this is one of the areas that is like really, really tightly linked between the broad engagement umbrella and the broad high bar umbrella, for example. The next 2 are around capacity building broadly, specifically around engagement, building capacities through professional development, through different types of fellowship programs, and mentoring programs among faculty, and then through both formal curricular training and other types of professional development training for students. So we're attending to both the skills, mindsets, knowledge bases, and capacities of faculty who are current researchers in the academy, as well as the future researchers and future citizens of our communities. And then finally, attending to culture and really uplifting and celebrating work, both through awards and other systems of recognition, right? So again, 8 really broad categories. And I'm willing to bet that many of you on this call, if push came to shove, would be able to say, yes, okay, Elise, I bet I could generate this list or something like it if you asked me to generate a list of institutional change mechanisms. And so what's the value add here? Well, the value add here, which I'll walk you through near the end of our presentation, is that each of these things can be broken down into multiple different types of actions. And here's the kicker. Not everyone is equipped to be able to pursue different types of actions. Some groups, some individuals are best positioned to advance specific types of strategies. So what do I mean by that? Multiple groups need to work in concert in order to enact change. And I'm going to break down, as I previewed earlier, the U.S. system of reforming promotion and tenure just by means of illustrating this example. So at a very high level, I know that this is a big map. I'm going to zoom into different pieces of it so that you can see it more clearly. At a very high level, this is a generalized map of a university, okay? Over here on the left, this is also a very abstracted map of a university. You've got the types of institutional policies that govern the rules of the road, okay? Over here on the right, again, this is very abstract. This in some ways makes no spatial sense. You've got the different publics and communities that interact with a university. At the top, you've got institutional leadership. You're thinking about presidents, chancellors, vice provosts, vice presidents. Down here in the middle, you've got academic units, schools and colleges. Over here, you've got centers, institutes, and service units. So this might be community engaged learning centers. It might be offices like mine. Down here at the bottom, arranging across all of these different spaces are the faculty, staff, and students. And notice that these folks span not just the schools and colleges, the centers, service units, and institutes, but also are themselves members of the publics and communities. And importantly, for those land grant institutions in the US, cooperative extension spans multiple of these systems as well, okay? So just as an orientation to these maps, now I want to draw your attention to the yellow bubbles. The yellow bubbles are how we break down the broad umbrella of reforming promotion and tenure into specific actions. And the positioning on the map demonstrates the types of roles and the types of positionalities for how you might need to interact with, or the types of folks who might need to interact in order to drive forward these actions. So for example, university leadership might need to be convened to explicitly identify different forms of scholarship and impact, and to articulate that as being valuable in a policy document. So typically what would happen is somebody like a provost or a vice provost for faculty affairs would charge a committee, right? A committee, and that committee is usually composed of a combination of deans or associate deans, certainly members of the faculty and members from faculty governance. They might involve a couple of really key boundary spanner staff. In some spaces and some universities might also involve community partners, to really examine and consider the types of language that current policy around tenure already considers, what that includes, what that excludes, and what they want to include. Generally speaking, then that committee would have some kind of engagement with the whole campus. They would develop some kind of revised draft, which would then go through some kind of vetting process, usually some kind of engagement process with faculty governance. There might be some executive engagement as well, some kind of up or down vote before the policy is enacted, right? And most people think that that's where it stops, but it's not where it stops. And I think that this is where hopefully the value of the framework comes in. After that, you have to start thinking about how you actually enact the policy. And so one of the things that is really, really critical for that policy is connecting that policy and the new promotion criteria to institution-wide missions and definitions. Like, people have to understand the connection point and have to feel like find the connection point, the why to that North Star for what they're doing, why they're doing it. You have to create a whole body of resources around that university-wide series of criteria that then are published usually on the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs website. And then importantly, especially for organizations like mine, like the University of Michigan, which has a university-wide policy, but then also has policies that are specific to the schools and units, you have to pull those things into alignment. right? Different disciplines might interpret what engaged research means differently. Engaged research in medicine looks really, really different than engaged research in social work. And that looks really, really different from engaged research in engineering. And so interpreting and understanding that and reflecting that in policy is itself going to be an engaged process across these different stakeholder bodies, okay? But we're still not done. After that, you then also have to think about how you collect information. And then the institutional leadership have to work with schools and colleges, as well as probably the institutes, centers, and service units to structure the documents to actually be able to collect the data around what this work looks like so that it can be recognized in promotion and tenure dossiers. And even then that's not enough, because then you have to start thinking about how this material gets reviewed. And so you have to think about who counts as a review or as a peer during review, because if the same old people are reviewing new guidelines and new materials, then you don't want to penalize people who might be are adhering to new tenure or guidelines because people are, or the folks who are reviewing are using the old standards, right? You have to think about who counts as a peer, and that might mean broadening the gates so that more interdisciplinary reviewers are included. It might even mean inviting folks who don't necessarily sit in academic spaces to be peer reviewers for dossiers. And then it also means providing support, both for the reviewers themselves and also for the faculty who are preparing the dossiers, right? And so you can see, I hope, that then this becomes a system-wide challenge. The system-wide challenge. There's certainly actions that folks at a university leadership level can take, but there's also actions that folks at a school college level can take. There are actions that folks in a faculty governance space can take. There are actions that folks in a center or service unit level can take. And so the question is if you're trying to think about promotion and tenure, how might you start to develop a series of coordinated actions so that you're collectively developing a flotilla that's rowing in a similar direction? Okay, so I've hopefully convinced you that these 8 areas of strategic action break down into many strategic actions themselves. But that's only part of the report. The other part of the report are case studies, which illustrate both strategies and process and successful efforts. So the first set of case studies, which are represented by these 8 universities, which I hope you recognize, is a huge heterogeneity of different institutional types. We've got HBCUs, we've got R2s, we've got R1s, big R1s. Excuse me, we surveyed these different types of institutions and asked them in their own words to identify programs that really exemplified the best ways that they were supporting engaged and equity-oriented scholars. And part of what's lovely about this is that these different programs then mapped onto the strategic action framework. And so by means of example, I'm going to highlight Mizzou, the University of Missouri. Mizzou's example really underlines the infrastructure cluster, the strategic action related to infrastructure. And this is what Mizzou did. So starting in the early 2010s, they really started to think about the way that cooperative extension, which is part of their university infrastructure, was positioned in the entire university. And a couple of interesting things happened. So one, university leadership recognized that it being positioned under the College of Agriculture maybe wasn't having as much influence as it could. And there was an opportunity to expand the reach and the influence of cooperative extension by moving it out of agriculture and making it system-wide. And so that got done. Similarly, and this connects to another strategic action cluster, there was installed for the first time a system-wide chief engagement officer that oversaw both extension and engagement. And as part of this big transition, that leader, a man named Marshall Stewart, led a series of statewide listening sessions with using the World Cafe model, where they basically leveraged the cooperative extension footprint across the entire state of Missouri to listen to what Missourians had to say about what they wanted to see from the University of Missouri. And that helped to shape some of their university-wide priorities, including investments that they ended up making in precision health and in broadband. And so I think that this is a really lovely example of how to leverage infrastructure to understand and then act on community articulated priorities, which really comes back into the idea of use-inspired, of applied, of highly integrated research, which is at the heart of what HIBAR is trying to do. The other types of case studies in the report are the case studies of the University of Michigan, my home institution, and the University of Arizona, are less about what happened, although that's inspiring in and of itself, and more about how it happened. So it's about strategy and process. And so the two case studies here are more about the two different types of change stories and the nuts and bolts of how leaders in these spaces went about pursuing different types of change. And I think the main thing that I would encourage you to take away from this is that it takes either a lot of time, a lot of money, or both to make big change. And so that's something that we'll come away with. So a couple of key thoughts to leave you with before I introduce you to the database of tactics and then turn it over to Kira. And then hopefully I think I see a couple of questions popping up in the Q&A. And so we'll hopefully turn to that. I think that one of the big takeaways that I came away with from this report is that everything really is contextual. If you know one university, you know one university. And I think that that's very true of the United States context. It's also true of the international context. So even if, for instance, the promotion and tenure system of the United States doesn't really resonate with you if you're situated outside of the United States, there are things that I hope you'll take from the report that you can take with you. And hopefully this is one of those universal truths, that there are strengths about your institution. And in order to be able to be an effective change agent, part of your job is to identify those strengths, build on them, and then create the catalyzing conditions to be able to enable change to happen. That change doesn't happen because one person wants it to. There has to be the conditions that make it ready. Two, and I think I just previewed this a little bit, that when you're talking about big changes, especially big changes that require shifts in culture, you need a lot of commitment. And that commitment frequently takes the time of a lot of time, or frequently takes the form of either a lot of time or a lot of money. So the two process case studies that I highlighted, the University of Arizona and the University of Michigan, are good comparisons for that. Arizona's case study, if you read into the details of it, really unfolded over 25 years and is still in process. And that's what I mean about a lot of time. It spanned multiple administrations, multiple vice provosts for academic affairs, and a lot of commitment from a lot of individuals over an extended period of time. The University of Michigan also involved a lot of time, but comparatively, 5 years is less than 25 years. So you've got an order of magnitude difference. But it cost $50 million. And so it's important to be a little bit mindful that if you want to move quickly, and 5 years in academic terms tends to be pretty quickly, you have to be ready to make some pretty big commitments to make some big impacts. It's important for me, especially to really highlight that culture is really important, and it eats policy, procedure, and practice for lunch. And what that means to me is that as an institutional change agent, thinking about the difference between a policy, in other words, changing those promotion guidelines, those tenure guidelines, and then changing the procedure, how those guidelines are interpreted at the unit level, and then the practice of how a faculty member might prepare a dossier to align to those guidelines, are all important. Like, those things are all different and important. But if the culture of a department doesn't support that faculty member to be able to articulate their high-bar research, their engaged research in that context, they're still not going to do it. And so attending to that, recognizing that, working towards culture change is part of your job as an institutional change agent. Similarly, it's important, and I think this is one of the details in the Michigan case study that I hope that folks have a chance to dig into, that it can be really a powerful lever to tie together resourcing with reporting in order to signal or reinforce commitment. So what I mean by that is one of the lovely things about the strategy that the folks in the Michigan case study did is that when the lead of the DEI strategic plan was working with university leadership, one of the things that they did is on an annual basis, when units were requesting their annual budgets, they had to report on their DEI strategic plan during the budget meeting. And so, like, there was an implicit signal by linking those things together that elevated the importance of the DEI work. So, and similarly, to not underestimate the impact of unrelated reforms. Sometimes part of that first idea of creating a readiness for change is about trying to create change in something where you can start moving. So if there is a big change that you're hoping to make, but you're not able to make the big C, capital C change right now, there might be something else that you can shift right now that can help start laying the groundwork. And that can be also a really good motivator. So I'll just say that there is some great work happening with APLU. There is some work to translate this framework even to an even broader faculty success framework. And there is an emphasis increasingly, it looks like this project just actually got funded by the National Science Foundation to really think about impact and assessment and evaluation, especially in the context of institutional change initiatives. There's a lot of really fantastic and other initiatives who are also working on this space. So this might be other inspiration for other high bar webinars, including some of my favorites. The Center for Advancing Research Impact in Society, the Transforming Evidence Network and Funders Network. This is a really great resource for those of you interested in leadership. And then just a couple of resources. Like I said, the materials from the report are all publicly available. And before I end, I just want to give you a brief highlight about where you can find the rich meat of that database for how you can unpack all of those other actions that I gave you the example of with the promotion and tenure. So if you navigate into the Open Science Framework repository, and you access or click on this link, access and tips to navigate this database of strategic actions, what you'll eventually open is this database. And in this database, what you'll see is, and actually let me eliminate this right now, is a whole series of cards. We've structured the information of cards that are organized in a few different ways to hopefully make it easier to navigate. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple of ways to navigate that right now. One of the ways that you can navigate it should be pretty straightforward. It's the strategic action cluster. So say you're interested in infrastructure, okay? You'll notice that what was visible changed color. And so all the clusters are color coded and also have a specific icon. And so you can navigate that. You can also then filter it such that only the infrastructure actions will pop up. If you're instead interested in trying to think about navigating based on your positionality, say you are, I'm hoping we've got some faculty here, but there are lots of actions that individual faculty can take. Say if you're interested in exploring what actions that you can take as a faculty member, you can filter by that, okay? And then once you've narrowed down the actions that you're interested in exploring, what you can do is click into one of these cards and you can navigate one of these cards in the following way. The name is hopefully pretty straightforward. The description will unpack what it means. Implementation will tell you the various different places that in a university that might be interested or might be partners in implementation. Possible actions or specific things you might do. The literature basis is where we drew this information from if you want to dig into it. If there were real world examples that we drew from, we listed them, including our citations, and then there's some additional information down at the bottom. So with that, I mostly want to leave you with an invitation to explore it and then turn things back over to Kira and to you all for some hopefully really robust Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Elise. That was a wonderful overview, and there's clearly so much more that we can dig into in the database. I'm very keen to dig through that myself right after this. So we'll open it up to questions. Again, for the audience, please feel free to add any questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But we have a couple here and a couple that I'm keen to ask as well, Elise. So first off, we talked a bit about institutional policy around tenure and promotion. I know that's top of mind for a lot of schools right now. Have you seen any process that will help to align schools and faculties around kind of a common change process here?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I'd say yes and also no. There are a couple of initiatives, and this is, I just want to be clear, is now extending beyond what we covered in the report and is now speaking a little bit to what I've seen nationally. And so I want to be clear that you won't necessarily find some of these comments in the report. So So I think that there's a lot of value in working in coalition, and I want to highlight a couple of opportunities to work in coalition as aligned with some of this work. Some of it feels maybe a little bit more like a dotted line than a direct connection, but want to be very clear. So one is working through organizations like HIBAR, right? Like the HRA. I don't know, so Kira and Lauren are better people to speak to this, if HIBAR is, the HIBAR Research Alliance is working on specific tenure initiatives. But if you are, then certainly sign on to that, those groups and work with them. There are other groups, including through Campus Compact, the Truckin' Initiative, that are focusing on tenure, especially related to community engaged scholarship. PTI, Promotion and Tenure and Innovation and Entrepreneurship, is a multi-campus coalition focused on reforming tenure standards specifically related to tech transfer, innovation, and entrepreneurship spaces. They published a big science paper and have been making a lot of really, I think, valuable waves to move the needle there. And one of the things I appreciate about PTI is that they structured their language such that it can be broadly applicable. It's not just narrowly focused on innovation and entrepreneurship. It can absolutely apply to what we would call HIBAR, what we would call engaged work as well. And then there are also some more strategic groups, including with the Transforming Evidence Network, the Transforming Evidence Funders Network, who are doing some institutional change work among funders and even among university leaders, really working to catalyze change in this space. And so is it all done yet? Absolutely not. Are universities taking note and starting to make steps towards it? I would say, yeah. I'd also say that, especially around tenure, these are, dare I say, calcified systems. They're really, really hard ships to steer, hard ships to turn. And so I think that there is movement. There's certainly been movement in the last 10 years, really remarkable movement. I think we're not done yet.
Mhm. Thanks, Elise. I'm curious, in your other hat at University of Michigan, what do you hear faculty departments asking for support on? And where do you see the best potential to create more repeatable processes versus ad hoc supports for public engagement initiatives?
Ooh, this is a great question. Okay. Let me tell you about a few different things that my team does, and that will hopefully answer that question a little bit implicitly. And then I'll tell you about a couple of things that I'm hoping that we can eventually do. And maybe that will also answer that question a little bit more explicitly. So one of the things that my team does is that we try and think holistically about what engagement across lots of different forms and spaces is and does, and what is common and different across them. So at Michigan, as a fairly well-established and well-resourced institution, for better or worse, we have a lot of resources and we've thrown a lot of different money in different spaces at different forms of engagement. So when my team started about 6 years ago, one of the first things we did is we landscaped all of the different programs and units across the U of M system that supported some form of engagement work. And we found over 200 of them, over 200 programs and units that supported some form of engaged work. That might mean testifying in front of a legislative body. That might mean supporting a community engaged research project. That might mean developing a museum exhibit. That might mean engaging with the media. It spans all of those different spaces. And so one of the things that was really missing in our space as a highly decentralized university without a chief engagement officer was coherence. And so the thing that my team really focused on was helping to escalate the complexity of that landscape, to connect the dots, to articulate what the foundational skills were to be effective in engaging in all of those different spaces, and then to develop robust training programs that prepared faculty who are interested in engagement to be able to develop those foundational skills and explore their options, and then help them launch an engaged practice. So one of our programs is a 5-week intensive fellowship program called the Public Engagement Faculty Fellowship Program that does those things and is paired with a catalytic funding program that helps launch programs. Another thing I think is important relates to the Modernizing Scholarship initiative is that we support the President's Office at Michigan in administering the President's Awards for Public Engagement and Impact. This is a culture building activity. It's really trying to elevate and celebrate the bright stars of public engagement. I think that this is important. We do a ton of work in partnership with our fabulous research development colleagues, which I think is really, really critical, trying to help faculty as they're developing grant proposals to tie societal impact very directly to their plans for their research, and to do that beyond hopefully just the requirements associated, especially with National Science Foundation proposals. So those are three areas that we do a lot of. We're interested in expanding into other areas, including some of the infrastructure things to address some of the places where U of M could be doing a better job of walking the walk in terms of equitable partnership and in evaluation. So I'd say those are areas that I think are replicable, are sustainable, are important, and don't necessarily get enough attention.
Thank you, Elise. For the campuses that you see gaining traction with these types of efforts, are there specific aspects of those universities that contribute to them gaining traction? And maybe in addition to that, is there a framework or a set of criteria within this database that we could use to kind of assess our institution's starting point? Where are we doing things well? Where do we have a long way to go so we can kind of identify those quick wins versus, maybe longer, more strategic change that's required?
Oh, such a good question, or a good pair of questions. So I'm going to tackle the second one first. The Modernizing Scholarship Framework does not have that self-assessment framework, unfortunately. I think that is a great tool that would be really, really valuable. There is one hosted by an organization in the United Kingdom called the National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement, called the EDGE Framework, and I will try and remember to send that to Kira to send along, but I'll repeat it just in case anybody wants to quickly Google it. The National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement in the UK, and it's the EDGE framework, EDGE framework. And what that does is it's a self-assessment rubric effectively for universities to evaluate themselves. And I believe it's 9 different criteria for how well they're institutionalizing different forms of engagement work. And so that might be a starting point. It doesn't map directly onto modernizing scholarship, but I think that that's an important piece. For the first question around institutions that are doing this well, I would say the places where I see the most energy and where I see the most promise are places where there is a really, really effective chief engagement officer who's been installed. So the people like the Marshall Stewarts of the world, or the Mike Rioses at UC Davis, or the MJ Callens at Brown, the Roberto Gallardos at Purdue, folks who come in and have enough trust in, or the trust of their executive leadership, and are able to engage with their campus communities and also put forward a bold, ambitious vision for the university that connects the engagement mission with the strategic focus of the university in a powerful, palpable, and actionable way. I know that not all of us can be or are chief engagement officers, but where I personally am most drawn to are for those leaders who are leading that type of work right now.
One of the recommendations or options to move us towards these goals is to develop new institutional structures and networks. Have you seen any best practices in terms of the layer of programming required to make those structures and networks function as intended?
Yeah. Oh man, such a good question. So there are a couple of things that I think are important. One is shared language, right? Like I highlighted this briefly, but I think that one of the things that really holds our communities collectively back is that we all have our favorite terms, and we get so stuck in arguing about semantics and terminology that we talk past each other, and we don't necessarily like do the hard work of coordinating. So like, as much as I hate to say we need to solve at least some degree of the translation language problem, I think we need to solve some degree of the translation language problem, if only that means becoming conversant in each other's languages, not saying we have to give up our cherished languages, right? I think that another thing that I would dearly love to see happen, because the universities that I've seen who have started doing this effectively are really like leveling up, is meaningfully figuring out how to implement data systems that actually track this work in meaningful ways. So UNC Greensboro developed a system called Collaboratory, which helps to track university community partnerships, among other things. And it can do all kinds of nifty things for universities in terms of reporting and blah, 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 blah. But I think that it's hard to understand how to have universities do better if you don't understand what your baseline is. And so in terms of like supporting institutional and infrastructural investments, I think that like really thinking about both infrastructural and programmatic investments in data and understanding, I think those would be two ones that I would highlight.
Thank you
Again,
so
great
much.
questions, y'all. This is delightful.
This is probably the last one, and then we'll turn it over to you to share any final takeaways. But Elise, did you encounter anything that was particularly unexpected when you carried out the work to develop this framework?
I won't say that it's unexpected, but I will say that it hit really home. And there is a quote that I have been carrying with me since she said it to me during an interview almost 2.5 years ago. At the time, she was the senior vice president for research and innovation at the University of Arizona, Elizabeth Cantwell. And she said something to the effect of anything that gets undertaken quickly can be undone equally quickly. And that really, it hit me kind of like a punch to the gut because I'm a fairly impatient person. And as somebody who loves universities and has I would like to say a strong moral compass and really desperately wants to see my university better reflect my moral compass. Like I feel a very strong impetus to try and push the university to change and to change quickly, right? And so like that idea of like being thoughtful and deliberative and having that actually be part of good process, it was surprising and it wasn't surprising, but it felt really impactful. So I think that's the thought that I would leave with is that institutional change work is hard, and it's hard for a reason. And I think that if we want to create durable systems, that maybe part of our challenge as institutional change leaders is to lean into that.
Thank you so much, Elise. And any final kind of comments or wrap up takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Honestly, just this has been a pleasure. Y'all's questions are so deep and thoughtful, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to come and engage. So thanks for playing along with the translation and connecting the dots across many different languages. And I hope to connect with this community on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.